It is approaching 9 o'clock in 10 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and get started so we can get through as much as we can in Numbers. I did ask for us to be led in prayer this morning. Go quiet then now.
Let's have a prayer. Our Father, we thank you as always for the time that we have together to enjoy each other's company, to worship you, to just try to learn more about your will for us in our lives. And we thank you that we have times like this every week. And Father, we pray that you'll bless this study and bless our learning and understanding of what you want for us in our lives. We pray you'll forgive us for our sins. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. So last week we looked at an introduction of Numbers to kind of get our minds focused on what we're going to be studying. We kind of went through some of the, I'd say, feelings we had before we approach it when we say, hey, we're going to do a 13-week study on Numbers, what type of emotions or feelings we get. We looked at that. But we also, when we did that, we heard some of the ones like, feel like you're judging along sometimes with reading all the different types of sacrifices they're doing. But we also looked at, and it changed as we went through, some of the positives of it. So just to recap, really just with one slide, the best way, well, I'll go back to that one. The best way for us to think about Numbers so far is we said it's the toddler years for Israel. And so we started listing out some of the things about when, how do you teach toddlers? And we started saying, hey, you're going to see a lot of repetition. When you teach toddlers, there's going to be a lot of repetition. And we're going to see that in the Israelites for Moses and God. There's going to be a lot of do nots. You tell your children when they're younger, do not touch the stove. You do instruct with do nots. And so you're going to have that in here. You're going to have punishments. Which we kind of dealt with consequences. You're going to have corrections. And you're going to have testing. Sometimes you have to let your children fail so they learn what's going to go on. You may know what's going to happen to them, but you also have to teach them a choice, how to make their own choices, whether they're good or bad, and what consequences come from those choices. And so we're going to see some testing going on. But that's the little kid. That's the toddler in the picture. The parent is God. And the parent during this time is the provider during the toddler years. The parent during this time is the protector. We are going to get our salvations and blessings from the parent. And so right now, when we go into Numbers, think that these people just left Egypt. They did not have a relationship with their God at that point. They saw the plagues. They saw amazing miracles. They're still young and toddlers and trying to form that relationship. So we have to look from that perspective on this. Again, when it comes to the study, make sure that you beforehand read the chapters. Week 3's handouts out there. There'll be a QR code to download it, post it as well. Read them ahead of time. If you need help reading them or you get kind of lost, that's what the handouts are for, to make it a little bit easier to understand what's going on. Always look for God's purpose when you're reading, especially when you start seeing some things like, what is the point of this? What kind of makes you go, aha? And then find connections to the New Testament. The whole idea of the Old Testament is to show us what God's original plan was for salvation. All right, so we start with chapter 1. And one of the reasons the name of the book is Numbers, which really in the wilderness, is because of the census that is taken in the beginning, and then you see a census taken at the end. But this is not the first census that was taken. If you were to have looked at Exodus 38:26, there was a census taken there before. What's the difference in the census of Numbers right now compared to the census that was done before in Exodus 28? Did anybody look that one up and see what it is? Or even what's just the purpose of this census in numbers? Was it get a full population of everybody?
See how many men there were of the age of the fight.
See how many men were of the age with the ability to fight. The one in Exodus 38 was a census of all of Israel. And so it was meant to help with organizing with the offerings to the tabernacle and all that. Is the idea of there was a census in Exodus 38, but this one is about those willing to fight. So when they're collecting this census, and let's just say, we've had it as a nation when we look at the draft. What should the mindset of the Israelites be if they are now saying we are going to go around and we are going to collect a census of those of the age to fight? What should that tell the Israelites are about to happen? There's going to be a war. There's going to be a battle. It's not, and if you think about that, when you think of there's going to be a battle, it's not going to be hey, this is going to be an easy life. Something is coming up and I'm trying to prepare, and God's trying to prepare them for it. And that's kind of when it goes in, that should be the focus of the Israelites is, wow, they're collecting a census of warriors. Why is that? What's coming up? We better prepare for battle. So that was the difference between the two censuses. So you'll see them in Exodus and you'll see them here. Yeah.
Is my memory serving right? Wasn't one of them a purpose indirectly also that when they went in and drew up the boundaries for the tribes, that it was according to their size as well?
I believe so.
I think that's brought up later, maybe according to the number.
When they separate, I believe they do look at it according to the numbers.
They would have to base that on the census, but it might be a later census.
Yeah. No, there's a few censuses, and they do look at it. I know I looked at the one, Moses' father-in-law told him, hey, count them by 50s and hundreds to make it easier and sort them by that. And it was used for making sure they had the sizes for the tabernacle offerings by the land as well. I think we'll see it later on for that one. Any other comments? So the next part is, I had a little fun, and if you didn't go through and take the time to look at the names, to collect a census is going to take a lot of effort, and so they asked Moses, God told Moses to pick 12 people from the tribes to help collect the census, because there's a lot of them, and to make it easier, you're going to need to be organized, and we're going to see a lot of organization take place. And so the 12 people that were selected, their names all had different meanings. And I got this one from a commentator named Chuck Smith. They're all dealing with God, except one. One of them is really interesting, but we go through, you have my God is a rock, at peace with God, a diviner, the gift of God. My God is Father, my God has heard. I like that one. Based off of where we're at in the Old Testament. My God is a rewarder. My Father is judge. Brother of health, event of God, God addeth. And I don't know how to pronounce if it's Ahira or Ahira. Did anybody look up that one? What it means? His brother is evil. Like that one, all the other ones deal with a lot of great things, but this one person, his name is defined as his brother is evil. That is what he will be known as, is when they say his name, wow, at least he's the good brother. His other brother, not so good. But all of these men had a name that dealt with something with God and being positive of who he is to them. And so these were the 12 chosen for the census. And if you look at all the characteristics, rewarder, God addeth, my Father is judge, they're all things that deal with characteristics of God that we will see inside Numbers. So warriors were over the age of 20 from the 12 tribes. I had a couple verses written down, Genesis 49, 8 through 12. Which of those tribes was the numerous of the 12 tribes? Not Simeon. Judah. Judah was the most numerous of them. Does somebody go to Genesis 49, 8 through 12? and see what that says. Whether you're whoever's going to do that, the one thing to keep in mind is we're starting to see some of God's promises from Genesis occurring in Numbers. That's one of the reasons why there are counts, is to, and I know it may go, oh, counts, but if you connect to what God has said before to this book, you'll start to see he is keeping his word from things that happened before the Exodus. So anybody have Genesis 49? 8 through 12.
Judah, your brother shall praise you, your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies, your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's club. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and the lionless, who dared rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler shall from between his feet, until tribute come to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his vow to the vine, and his donkey colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk.
Thank you. And so we look at this, and it's true. It relates us to Genesis 48:9, to prediction of what? How is Judah going to be viewed compared to the other tribes? It's going to be viewed as a leader. And we're going to see that going on. And right now, they have the biggest number of the tribes of Israel. And if we keep that in mind on what's going to happen with when we go to chapter 2 of how everything's sorted, you're going to see what happens with leadership here. When you look at the tribes, though, one of the tribes was left off, the Levites, for the counting. And when we look at that, we had two tribes that were included from Joseph. We have here, the two tribes from Joseph were Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim, sorry. Those were taken in. And if you were to look at Genesis 48:5 through 21, those were adopted in because of Joseph. And so those are the other two tribes. Since the Levites were taken out, those are the ones that came in and replaced it. And if I look at 5 through 21, I'm not going to read all of it. But you have here, when Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, "Who are these?" "They are the sons God has given me here," Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me so I may bless them." It says that Israel's eyes were failing because of his old age. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and it says that but Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. So Ephraim was given the blessing by Israel over Manasseh. And if you were to look at the sizes of them, and we have right here, I put these in, Ephraim was a larger size than Manasseh was. You actually see the blessing from Israel from Genesis happening here. You see it when it comes to the size of Judah. You see it when it comes to the size of Manasseh. I did the percentages on the right-hand side so you can kind of see which ones are the biggest and which ones are the smallest. And we'll look at this again after the second census. Any comments or observations that you saw so far with the numbers and the tribes? This was the first one. The second census we're going to get at the end when they enter into the promised land, when they look at what happens to the size of everybody. So we have Ephraim and Manasseh at the bottom to see the different sizes that go on. So they numbered them. The Levites were not included. What were the reasons why the Levites were not included? They will not be given any land, their inheritance. They will be given a little bit of some parts to deal with that, but they will not receive an inheritance of land the same way the other tribes will. What's the other reason why the Levites are not included in the warrior census?
They'll carry out the work of the temple.
They're going to carry out the work of the temple. And if you're going to carry out the work of the temple, and you're going to be the one who is helping with all this stuff in the temple, should you be the one going to battle, will you be clean at that point? No. So God separated the Levites completely so that they have a clean person, a clean clan, somebody who can go in the temple and help out with everything compared to the others. So they were completely separated between them. Any other observations or even foreshadowing that you know of the Levites? All right, so this is how they were instructed to camp. They're instructed to camp with the tent of meeting in the center, and then to have the Levites and the priests and Moses around the outside. And if you look at where Moses and the priests are, they're right on the east side next to Judah. And we know that Judah is in the east, and you can kind of foreshadow with that is what from Judah, what do we see coming from the New Testament? And so it may look, when you look at this, a little bit of a, say, again, with the numbers, you can kind of go, okay, what's the point? But there's a lot here. One of my favorite ones to look at, we'll come back to this one because I have the next one with the same thing, is when Mary was visited by the angel, she told she was going to have a son, and they're going to name him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And when they do the tent, when they start organizing and they have their camp, this is the first time God is in the center of where they live. God is with them in the tabernacle. And so when you see the layout and you see what's going on, how they're setting up all the clans, right in the very center of it, God is with them. He is in the tabernacle. It's what he wants. He wants to be in the center of their lives. He wants to be the focus of their lives. And so I liked when I was going through, like, Jesus as Emmanuel, God with us. It's going back to what God wanted. God wanted to be the center of the Israelites' lives. He wanted to be the focus, and he wants to be the center of our lives. And so for us, we should have Christ in the center of our daily lives, just like how God was in the center of theirs. And then what separated the tribes from the tent of meeting? The priests. It goes through, and we'll see this in the next one, it goes through, I'd say, a purification or cleanliness to the outside. Is the very center has to be pure. That's God's location. Who helps keep it pure and helps assist? You have the priests, Moses, the Levites. Then you have the outside, you have the rest of the clans. And so sin cannot creep inside. You have barriers that each all the way up that should stop the sin from going. Even on the outside of all of these tribes, what's going to go on the outside of those tribes? Who will not be allowed to be inside the tribal area? Be pushed outside. The enemy, but who else? Who? The unclean. The ones with leprosy, skin disease, physical uncleanliness, they're going to have to go outside the tribal area, and they're going to have to go and be further away from God. And so you start to see a cleanliness when it comes to the closer you are, the more clean you are, the less sin there is, well, less than there should be as you approach closer. And the more sin or uncleanliness, the further you're going to be away from God. And so we have that as the tribal setup. I have here the organization. There is a point to it. There's a point to it for the marching. There's a point to it for the upcoming battles, why they organize this way. But there's more to it. Can someone read Matthew 20, verse 26 through 28.
Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many.
So how do you think that relates to the tribal setup? Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man. Where are those?
Judah's going to be prominent because of the lineage of Christ.
Judah's going to be prominent because of the lineage of Christ. They're the largest.
You have, at the end, Manasseh, Ephraim, Benjamin, that's one of the smallest tribes. So there's an element of protection as you're going toward king in the order.
There's a protection in the order.
I don't know, see those that are designated to serve closest to the king. To the title.
Now,
And I'm not sure this matters, but these are all Joseph's kids. It's his whole lineage on the left side. Benjamin. Oh, I'm sorry, no, Ephraim and Manasseh.
Yeah.
And the youngest, so I meant two youngest, right? I don't know if that matters.
No, those are the two, Benjamin and Joseph were from different mothers than the rest. So those were the favorite of their fathers. So
Yeah, I'm just pointing out, I'm not sure there's any significance there if you were right.
there's probably significance with the order of where they're at. I know with Judah being on the east, there is, I'm sure there's, with the west being the smaller, with what direction you're going, where the most protection should be. I was leaning towards, can you repeat what you said?
Those closest to the tent are designated to serve, that kind of relates to your back.
Yeah, it says, if you're going to become great, you must be like a servant. And those who are closer to God in this setup are those who are serving God. The Levites, the priests, Aaron, Moses, though as you get closer to the tent of meeting, there is a higher expectation of what your life should be like. You should be committed to serving and serving his purpose. And if you look at it, Jesus, and you can go to Hebrews. I know it says Hebrews 12:2. I don't know if that's this one, but in Hebrews, it referred to Jesus as the what? Jesus was the what for everybody? The high priest. Jesus was the high priest. And if you look at where the high priests would be, they would be allowed to go into the center and make the offerings for us. And so those who are willing to serve, if you're willing to serve and you're going through and committing yourself to God, you get closer and closer and closer to his presence. Isaac.
So it's extremely modern for us to align north as vertical, and there's like a weird psychological effect where because we put it on the top, we consider it to have more importance. But that's very modern. It's due to the North Star as well as most of the maps being made by Europe. Most cultures oriented east preeminent. The sun rising in the east was one of the main reasons for that. That's actually where we get the word oriental, because we oriented the compass in the eastern direction, and it does list the eastern camps first. So there's very possibly an idea of preeminence in the east.
I saw some maps of this where they turned and they put east north. And I was like, and I just had turned my head to understand with it. I didn't put it that way. But yeah, the east is the focus on all of this. And that's why you see Moses and the priests on the east. You see Judah on the east. There's a lot of foreshadowing of the significance of that direction. Thank you, Isaac. Any other comments?
Are you going to move on from the organization
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Now, I don't want to jump in the middle of your.
No, you're good.
At the end of Exodus, there's some explanation of the cloud and pillar of fire, and it says in the very last verses that it never departed from their sight, and it was in the middle, he was in their midst, but he came down and went back up. Like the Lord would come down to the tent of meeting and then lift up. And but one time when Moses was finished with all this work in Exodus, the law and all that, it says he couldn't enter because the cloud filled the tabernacle of meeting and he could not go in. And so there's some different ways that God was seen in the center like this, but mainly up and down, you know. He was up, and when he moved, when he lifted, when he was there in the presence, he came down above it, but there were times when he filled it.
Yeah.
So just to further that illustration of it being in the middle, his interaction and communion with the people was not always exactly the same purpose.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments?
Isn't it in Genesis 49 where Judah was essentially set aside to be where the king would come from?
I believe so. I think it was that 49, 8 through 12 area where it was predicting.
49:10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah,
Yeah.
nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes.
So Judah plays a very important role, and especially you said as the east side. Make sure I didn't miss anything. No. Any other comments? You may go through. Yeah, go ahead.
I think there might also be some foreshadowing of the second coming. When you look at Matthew 24, where it talks about how lightning flashes from the east to the west, so the coming of the Son of Man shall be. That prominence of east to west.
Yeah. When you look at this, and this is what I go through, and I said at the beginning, we listed out all the things, our feelings of the numbers in the beginning of, drudgery, the census, all the size of the clans, the order of the offerings. We may come to it with some bias on how we feel about it, but if you take a moment and you look at just some of the setups, it was really important for the Israelites to see it because it's their toddler years. God's trying to show them and teach them, and right now it's an organization. It's really important we're going to find out that they stay organized, not just because if they're going to move and they have the size of people that they have, imagine moving that many people. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of organization. The different jobs and roles they play are going to take a lot. So we may get hung up when it goes, okay, it's organized this way. But when you look at it and you see and try and connect on what was God trying to teach them that we are aware of now because of the New Testament. If we look at the next one, so chapter 1 was the warriors, about the census. Chapter 2 looks at the workers. Chapter 3 looks at the worshipers. And so we look at chapter 3 looks at Aaron and his sons. Only 2 sons, I'm really bad at the names in the Old Testament. If anybody knows where I can get a click and they pronounce it, it'd be very helpful. But he had 4 sons. It was Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, but only the last 2 remain. Does anybody remember what happened to the other 2 from Leviticus 10, 1 through 7? Do you know what it means by strange fire?
God smote them. You're talking about Nadab and Abihu.
Yeah.
God smote them because they didn't get the fire from where God had prescribed they would get the fire.
Yeah, the 2 priests did not get the fire from where God told them to get the fire. So they brought in unclean fire is what they did. And in Leviticus 10, 1 through 7, that's where it's described, and they were killed. They were smited by God because they did not serve in the priestly manner the way God prescribed them. And we have to realize, it may go, wow, that's severe. However, when you look at, and we kind of talk about this, when you look at the layout, as you get closer to the center, how much uncleanliness is allowed? None. And so when the priests did not follow God's command of going through and using the right fire, they're at the very center where there cannot be uncleanliness in God's presence. And so those two are gone. And so now we have just two priests and we have Aaron. But there's a purpose to it. Can someone read James 3:1? Because if you were to, when someone's getting to James 3:1, I'll just comment this. If you read the chapter, like I said, I'm not going to go verse by verse, but when you read Numbers, it talks about and it tells the story of what happened very briefly to the two priests and why they were killed. And so it repeats it again in Numbers. So Leviticus 10:1-7 is where it happens, and then it kind of talks about it briefly in these chapters. But if you look at James 3:1, who has it?
All right, my brother, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment.
So what do you notice about that? I went to James 3:1. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. How does that relate to Aaron's sons as the priests? Yeah.
It's just one example of many where they just said, we want to worship the Lord, but we would like to kind of do it our way. And God's just sort of saying, no, no. And he's just, we all do this as a parent. You're tolerant at some point. We're like, enough. Just set an example.
Yeah.
I was going to say the example part too. They were people that were first called to do what God wanted them to do. As you said, they were to train the tribes and first out of the gate and clean it up. So it was a bad example for them. So God had to show them what was coming.
Yeah, if you look at the priests and the Levites, they were held at a higher cleanliness. There's a higher standard for them. And we do see that kind of comments in the New. Oh, sorry, Josh, go ahead. No, I'll talk too much.
It's the same with teachers and priests. Unfortunately, there are some things in life in the service of God that are more public than others. And the more public the person is, the easier it is to influence people. And if it's influencing people in the right way, then yay, good. But if it's leading people astray, the sins of all of the people are also on the shoulders of the people that led them astray. And that applies to teachers. I believe that's what it's talking about in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, that was the huge issue with these priests that were breaking the law, is they were not just making things wrong for them. They were damaging the relationship of God with all of the people that were relying on them. So it's a caution. And with great power comes great responsibility.
Got to throw that one in.
And I would argue damaged what God was doing for us. Right? He's drawing pictures to be learned in the future. And so just letting things go, well, don't worry about that. Like, well, you can do it that way. You can, however you want. You're not going to get a clear distinction of the mediation of Jesus Christ in this case for us as high priest if the high priest mess it up. So it has far-reaching implications.
Yeah, and so better said than probably I could have said it. But I wanted to make the connection because you did bring up that the Levites do play a role with, in a way, teaching the tribes in a way of what's expected and the helping out in the tabernacle, in the tent of meeting. They had a role, and a significant role. And if they're the ones who are causing the problems, I know, Josh, you and I talked about optics. if they're seen as, well, it's okay. Once you start chipping away, as the people who are closer to God, it's leading other people astray, which affects, as Matt said, us. There are connections that we need to see on what's being taught and what was said in the Old Testament to what is being even shared with us in the New Testament. And the role of the priests and the Levites, how is that affected? And you can see it in James 3:1 with what is the role of teachers? Why are they held to a higher, they're told they're held to a higher standard. And it was the same thing with the priests and the Levites. Any other comments? Yeah.
I think it shows that you need to search your heart. If you want to be a teacher, what is your reasoning for wanting to be a teacher? And are you willing to take that responsibility?
Just because you have a desire, where is that desire coming from and how are you approaching it? Good.
I think you could, there's a living, to me, example of what was trying to be prevented, the erosion of the worship service. Even today, how many denominations actually have communion every Sunday?
Yeah.
That's that chipping away that you talked about.
Yeah, the different types of denomination splits that occurred. The fourth area of responsibility, we already kind of mentioned, was it talked about in Deuteronomy 24:8, where they were expected to, in a way, teach the people, the tribes, as well, and keep them informed of the knowledge of God, what's being shared, hold them to a standard. And if the teachers aren't doing it, it's setting a bad example to those from the tribes.
Dare I say,
I backed away.
back to the discussion of Nadab and Abihu and strange fire and those things. I just think it's important that in this discussion we temper those things with the fact that this was the law. And we see God moving to the center of his people. The law was still written on stone. The law is now written on our hearts. There is grace afforded us, but there was not these folks. Now, Romans 6:1, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. But I'm just saying, I believe it's important for us to temper that discussion with the fact that there is grace available to us, but there was not available to these folks because of the priests that would come and do things for us.
Yeah.
That has not happened.
No, we are at a very, good point. We're at a blessed point to have that grace now. That they did not have at that point. We go through, and you can kind of look more of all the things that goes on with the worshipers. The one thing what it says, I wanted to point out, when it comes to setting apart the Levites, it said hakreb was the word that's used. That is a purely sacrificial word. So when it says they are setting apart the Levites to be near to God, the word hakreb is used, and that word is sacrificial. And it really talks about how those tribes are going to be taken completely and used. And it's kind of foreshadowing, we're going to look at next week, about how they are being, in a way, sacrificed. What is their sacrifice? How is God using the Levites in replacement of a sacrifice? If we look at, I want to make sure we hit chapter 4. Chapter 4, it can be pretty intense with numbers because it talks about all the different cloths that had to go on when they're moving. So when they're moving, Aaron and the priests, you have to go inside and you have to cover everything and you have to do it in a certain manner. This cloth, then this cloth, and this cloth, and this is the stuff that can seem when you're reading. What's the point? What this is kind of, why do we have to pay attention to this? And so I created a kind of a Venn diagram that outlines all the different, a visual aid of all the different colors of the cloths and what went onto them. And you can kind of look at some of the things. And one question I had in the sheet was actually I need to find it so I say it right. The curtain that was used to separate the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. If you were to read Numbers, is there a similarity between how the curtain was used in the tabernacle and how it was used when moving? Did anybody notice that part in Numbers of the actual curtain that was separated God, most holies of holies, when they had to take it apart for moving, when God says time to move? Did anybody notice something interesting about that curtain? How they were supposed to use it? What's in the most holy of holies? The ark. Nobody can enter that except for the high priest. So when they took the curtain down, and you look at the Venn diagram, you can see the curtain actually had to go over the Ark of the Covenant still. It still separated them even when they were moving. So physically, when they set it up, the curtain separates them from the Ark of the Covenant. And when they're going, it's not like we're going to put all the curtains over here, we're going to put all the pegs over here. That curtain still had to separate. So even when they're moving, there's still that barrier between all the Israelites and God when it comes to how it's organized in the tent of meeting. And the colors, you can go through and say a little different things about the colors, but you have blue, you have purple purple and scarlet, and you can try and read into it. And I go, oh, wait a minute, if you mix a couple colors, you might get the other one. There's no biblical, here's the meaning behind the colors, but there is a nice way of remembering them. The blue cloth, blue is really the color of heaven. If you think about blue, you think about the sky, you can think about the color of heaven. Jesus was called the Son of God. So when you see the blue, you can think about the color of heaven. What does the color purple represent? Royalty. And if you look at the purple, you have the bronze altar in there, but you have here, Jesus was called the King of Kings. So Jesus is the Son of God, the color of heaven, blue. Jesus was called the King of Kings. You have purple, the color of royalty. And what about scarlet? You have blood. Jesus was called the Son of Man. The colors may not have meaning of you take blue and add scarlet, you're going to get this, or it may not have any type of meaning in that sense of whatever the wheel is for the colors. But there is actually a way for us to help remember the cloths that were used. So we can at least, part of us, we have to have his word written on us is the blue is heaven. Jesus is the Son of God. You have the purple of royalty. Jesus is the King. And you have the blood. Jesus was our sacrifice. We can use these colors to make a connection to the Old Testament when talking about it and seeing how can we remember these things and see where God was trying to lead us towards. Any closing comments?
It's interesting that the warriors were 20 years old. The priestly duties were given to men of the tribe who were 30 years old. And Jesus became a priest or started his earthly ministry when he was 30 years old. Luke 3.
I didn't even think about that for next week, yeah. When the priests start their duties. So next week is chapters 5 through 8. Again, we're not going to do like verse by verse. The first 8, you're going to kind of see a lot of good obedience with them. So if you need help with it, look at the handout, and we'll move on next. Thank you.